On This Week in Enterprise Tech, IT workers get paid, we drone on, then Tripwire jumps in to tell us why Microsoft's Armageddon is happening in Ireland. Twiat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiat. This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 159, recorded September 15, 2015, or September 25th, 2015. Microsoft's legal tripwire. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Are you hiring? With ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100-plus job sites, including social networks, all with a single click. Screen, rate, and hire the right candidates fast. Try ZipRecruiter with a free 4-day trial now at ZipRecruiter.com/Twiat. And by Igloo Software. Igloo is an intranet you'll actually like. Use blogs, calendars, file sharing forums, task management, and wikis to work better together with your teams. Sign up now and try it for free at igloosoftware.com/Twit. Welcome to Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. But I'm not guiding you by myself. I'm joined by my co-host, my cast of characters, starting with Mr. Brian Chee, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii. Brian, how are you this day?
I'm doing pretty good. It's turning out to be a very, very, very busy Friday. Good thing this is in the future, right?
Right. We are actually in the future, and right now I am at Maker Faire, hopefully standing with Ahmed and looking at the next generation of makers. Speaking of the next generation of makers, there's a man who is also part of our co-hosting cast, who I know is quite the engineer himself, Mr. Lou Maresca. He is a lead developer over at Microsoft. Lou, thank you for jumping into the co-host spot.
Thanks for having me again, Padre.
By the way, for the people who are watching the video, that's our Lou has connection problems picture. So you may be seeing that every once in a while. Well, gentlemen, why don't we go ahead and jump straight into the blips. This first one is all about IT workers getting paid. Kinda. Now, Robert Half has published their 2016 salary guide, and IT positions seem to be taking the lion's share of pay bumps among professionals in the United States. According to the report, salaries for professionals in the U.S. are projected to rise 4.1% in the new year. That's against an expected rise of 5.3% for starting salaries in IT. The report goes on to emphasize that the 5.3% is the average. If you're a lead application developer, you can see a 6.7% bump. Mobile apps, 8.2. Data scientist, 8.9. And the best bump? Well, that belongs to wireless network engineers who can expect a 9.7% increase in their paycheck.
Is sharing always a nice thing? Well, the new Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, or CISA, requires that Homeland Security set up a real-time system for sharing information from the private sector to the government agencies. It also provides a broad legal immunity to businesses who are blanketed under it for data sharing. As you might have already figured out, businesses are actually very much for this bill since it can help protect them from data breach lawsuits. The question everyone's trying to answer is how far will this bill go, and it will also be a breach in privacy for consumers. There are additional amendments offered to the bill that could restrict the ability for law enforcement agencies to use information for criminal prosecutions, and also it clarifies how companies can defend themselves after the breach. It doesn't, however, specify any specific government agency that would be privy to the information. As it's written today, it's all agencies or nothing. Although CISA would educate government agencies to what extent data breaches have reached for corporations, it doesn't specify how the information will be protected or used. This looks to only be the beginning of plans to start protecting citizens for cyber threat data breaches.
GM's Phil Abram is doing an I told you so again, but this time about car software. The man that tried to get Sony to sell computer-connected mini-discs only to get squashed by Sony president Norio Oga is claiming that vehicle infotainment systems suck. In an interview with Digital Trends, he commented that while he doesn't quite agree with Mark Andreessen's article, software eats the world, he does point out that companies like Kodak were at one time synonymous with pictures, and then filing for bankruptcy the next step, didn't have the intestinal fortitude to eat part of its core business in order to grow, obviously, into digital. The automotive industry is facing the same big decision, but should probably listen to someone that isn't a car guy. And his resume happens to include Sony, Sonos, Sharp, and Kodak. And of course, I'm talking about Phil Abram. He points out that car makers have been trying to build infotainment systems in-house with varying levels of success, with most users saying, meh. But he's proposing, why not just leave the software to the big boys like Google and Apple and so forth?
Well, VMware has answered containers with containers on VMware. Analysts have been wondering how VMware would counter the rising popularity of containers as companies like Docker increase the speed of their encroachment into the previously unbreakable virtualization space. And now we know. VMware is fighting the move from virtual machines to containers by making virtual machines designed to run containers. At VMworld, VMware took the wraps off Project Photon, a super lightweight version of VMware's ESX hypervisor that has been tweaked to efficiently run application containers. Project Photon has two parts. First, the Photon machine, which handles the hypervisor layer and includes Photon OS, a customized lightweight Linux distro optimized for containers. Second, the Photon controller, which is a control plane capable of controlling thousands of Photon machines. VMware is convinced that this approach will allow customers to test the specific benefits of virtual machines against those of containers without having to build out more infrastructure. We had a chance to play with the tech at VMworld, and its integration with Docker seems to suggest that it might just be a way to stem the bleeding into containers.
Rebuilding the internet in space. Elon Musk, or should we call him Tony Stark, strikes again on his plans to bring the internet to every person on the Earth. The SpaceX founder recently approached the federal government to ask for permission to begin testing his new internet network in space. The plan calls for 4,000 inexpensive satellites in low orbit that smoothly handshake with each other, allowing for high-speed internet to be provided to regions that don't have internet. Many large corporations like DirecTV and tycoons like Bill Gates have had the same idea and have been successful, but Musk has the resources. Facebook is the other corporation that has been looking to do something similar, but it abandoned the program just after it was funded. With SpaceX's rockets and the ability to construct low-orbit satellites, Musk looks like he could succeed where others have failed.
Comcast is paying up for a privacy breach to the tune of $33 million. Comcast is getting ready to fork over the money for accidentally disclosing names, phone numbers, and addresses of people that had paid to keep that information private. The bad news is about $25 million is going to state agencies, and customers only end up with about $100 each for the privacy breach. The troubling part of this breach is that the information was disclosed about law enforcement officers, judges, and domestic abuse victims. Oops, just doesn't seem enough for an upgrade failure that failed to maintain the privacy flag for online and physical phone book information sources.
Last week, AT&T announced that they have finished an investigation into suspicious activity in the number of phone carrier unlock requests being made to their Torch servers, the ones responsible for unlocking cell phones. Started in September of 2013, the investigation discovered that 3 of its employees had installed malware on the AT&T network, allowing unauthorized remote servers to process unlock requests without authorization, allowing the perpetrators to unlock stolen or unauthorized phones. AT&T is now suing Kyra Evans, Mark Sapatin, and Nguyen Lam. Investigators found the identity credentials of these former employees and linked them to the software that was abusing the Torch system. AT&T also names Swift Unlocks and its owner, Prashant Vera, as the business that was selling the purloined codes, paying Evans and Sapatin at least $20,000 and $10,000, respectively. Well, that does it for the blips. Next up, we're going to be jumping into the bytes, but first, let's go ahead and thank the first sponsor of this week in Enterprise Tech, and it's ZipRecruiter. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you own a business, or are you responsible for hiring in that business? Because if you are, then you know that the people that you hire, your employees, are going to be the ones who decide the success or failure of your endeavor. They're your public face. They're your inspiration. They're the people who do the real work. So why would you leave your hiring up to chance? Now, ZipRecruiter understands that in order to get the employees that you want, the ones that you need before they get snatched up by somebody else, you need to get your word out there as much as possible to find the people who don't just have the skills, but who also fit into the cultural repertoire of your environment. Now, thanks to ZipRecruiter, you can post to 100+ job sites with a single click and be instantly matched to candidates from over 6 million resumes. Now, just listen to Scott. He's an actual ZipRecruiter client, and he wrote, "The recruiting process used to be painful. Before, I'd post to several places, get 1 million resumes, but only a few qualified response. It's torture. But with ZipRecruiter, we post once and get qualified candidates in one easy-to-review place. We've hired some of our best employees using ZipRecruiter. Just post once, and within 24 hours, you can watch your candidates roll into ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use interface. They've been used by over 400,000 businesses, and you can try it now for free. Getting the right people for your company is so important. Do you really want to leave it up to chance? Now, today, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/Twiet. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Twiet. And we thank ZipRecruiter for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's go ahead and jump into the bites. We've got something special for you because, well, we have been noticing more and more that drones are encroaching on the field of the enterprise. It's one of the fastest growing businesses in California. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. It's going to be a $1.4 billion business in California alone by the end of 2015. It's going to surpass $10 billion across the country by the end of 2016. So it's something that we need to watch for, especially as developments occur. Cheebert, I wanted to bring you into the conversation really quickly because you've got some very exciting news, both about some projects that you're building and the kind of information that they're going to be able to provide. Could you tease our audience a little bit?
Oh, sure. Well, the good news is I'm a co-PI on a DARPA grant. And the plan is we're actually going to be shooting a laser from shore and hitting a drone with a mirror, and it's going to bounce into the water. And the idea is we're going to be doing spectrometry at a long distance. And the idea is after World War I, an awful lot of mustard gas got dumped off the shores of Hawaii, and no one marked down where they were. So the goal is we're going to go and try and figure out through spectrometry where the heck those munition dumps are and see if we can go and clean up the ocean and prevent things from leaking.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting because I was at Interdrone 2 weeks ago, and one of the industries that's starting to, enter into the drone area is agriculture and gas exploration. And they found that they can use very inexpensive craft, relatively inexpensive based on what they had been using in the past, to do with a few tens of thousands of dollars what used to take hundreds or millions of dollars to do properly. Lou, let me call you in here because I don't know if you could talk about it, but I have heard hushed whispers around the drone water cooler that Microsoft has actually been working on a few skunkwork type projects involving swarm logic and software that fits on Internet of Things devices that will actually harness the power of drones.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of stuff going on in the garage. I don't know if you've ever heard of Garage before, but there's a separate kind of off the books thing that goes on at Microsoft called the Garage. And there's a ton of Internet Things kind of dealing with drones, 3D printing things for drones, so on and so forth. So yeah, there could be something down the pipe. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, again, it's super secret. By the way, I do want to get to Microsoft at some point because I have got to check out that garage. It sounds like the coolest little makerspace in Redmond. Well, just for your viewing pleasure, I wanted to bring you to Interdrone itself. Cheebert, in honor of you, I wanted to show a craft that might actually be right up your alley. It's ready to buy now. It's called the Altus, and this is what it looks like. The technology here at Interdrone has ranged from everything to carry your drone into things that you want to mount on your drone. But sometimes you just need a really, really big drone. We're here at Altus. They're going to explain what this is. I'm standing next to Simon Morris, who's going to tell us why sometimes you're going to need this industrial look. Simon, What is this monster?
Okay, I'm glad you asked because we're launching it this week. This is our LRX, and LRX stands for Long Range Extreme Weather. And so it's been our calling card that we always make industrial machines with a strong wind capability, and we've transferred that to this machine and added the long endurance factor as well. So as you can see, it has a stagger prop arrangement. So large motors and rotors on the top, smaller high-speed motors and rotors on the bottom, so that it gives it a 30 to 35 minute endurance with a good payload, but still maintains that 30 to 35 mile an hour wind tolerance.
One of the things that we've seen is X8 configurations that can give us loitering time if you put a big enough battery, but yours is also incredibly mission capable. Not only do I get the fault resistance of having multiple motors, multiple props, but you also include things like collision avoidance and multiple GPS systems. Tell me about the loadouts I can choose.
Okay, you hit the nail on the head there with the safety stuff, and I should mention too there's a ballistic parachute as well in case all else goes wrong. It's our own patented system. The payload options are many. A lot of the work we do is aerial surveys, so it's a photogrammetry rig, something like that. We're doing aerial inspection, like with this one here. We have a really nice CM100 turret by UAV Vision. It has an optical sensor with a 30x zoom and a FLIR system on board as well. So we do LiDAR, we do multispectral, you name it, we do it. We've got a gimbal base for every conceivable application.
This is sort of the dream for drone operators. They want an aerial truck. They want something that's stable enough to always work, that will always be ready in the field, and yet they can put what they need for any particular mission. If they want extra endurance, they load it up with batteries. If they need to work in a tight confines, they add the collision avoidance. And if they need to work in an area where pinpoint precision is needed, you add the dual GPS option. So let me ask you, what's next? I mean, what else are you going to add to the truck?
Yeah, well, that is the question. I think the next thing for us is probably going to be ready for beyond line of sight to happen, and we'll have a bunch of mission control systems on board that'll permit us to send it out for really long kind of missions. So, yeah, that's probably the thing that we're knocking on the door of course, when the regulations allow and that stuff as well. Yeah.
Oh, I have to ask, although I'm a little afraid to ask, pricing and availability. I know that this was just released, it's a new product, and it's a one-of-a-kind product, but what can I expect to pay if I want to load one out, say, for Twit TV?
Sure. Well, we can fit you a nice gimbal with a 4K camera, so you look good from everywhere. The whole retract system, mission control, flight control, you're looking at around about $60,000, including the parachute.
And if they wanted to find out more information, where can they go?
Yeah, well, probably best now is to go either our website address, which is altisuas.com, or for here in the US, bluechipuas.com. Blue Chip are our partner and reseller, and they're based in Wichita, Kansas.
Simon, thank you very much for talking to us. This is the Altus, because sometimes you need a truck. I was so with them until he set the price at $6. I understand if you are in the enterprise, if you're in an industrial sector, if you're doing agriculture, if you're doing gas exploration, $60,000 isn't a whole lot. But for my budget, that's a bit high. Cheebert, would that fit the parameters of your project?
Not this grant, but a different one.
Right. You know, what I really like about that craft, though, is it is a truck, and that's why I called it a truck. You bolt on the modules that you need. It's not a device that does just one thing. It doesn't fly well. It doesn't fly acrobatically. It doesn't do camera work. It does all of those depending on how you outfit it. I love that chassis design, and I also like Lou. I don't know if you noticed. I really like their control station. It looks like something out of Call of Duty. It's a Pelican case that basically has all the electronics, and you open it up, you point the antenna towards the drone so that you maintain a strong connection, and then you get all your visual reports. Everything from the waypoint mapping computer, so you can tell it exactly where to go via GPS, to the camera looking out the front.
Mission Impossible almost.
It really is. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to show you that, and I'm gonna show you a couple of segments out of Interdrone, because I think it will open up our audience to a new domain. Because it's an incredibly profitable domain. It's something that a lot of our people should get into, because network engineers are especially needed in this. I was over at the FLIR booth at Interdrone, and they were showing me a $1,200 package that they can mount underneath a drone. They were mounting it underneath an Inspire, a DJI Inspire. and they could program it to go over a crop area, do 35 minutes of loiter time, just back and forth, and it would come back and it would generate a 3D map for you because it would combine the IR image with a standard camera image that shows you the topography of the area, so it gets mapping, but it also shows you moisture levels because you'll get different temperatures based on how much moisture is in the area. It's that sort of tech that I think it's going to drive demand for this technology in the enterprise space. Lou, do you see any other uses? I mean, yes, there's agricultural, yes, there's survey, yes, there's gas exploration. Where else might we find value?
There's a ton of value, actually. I've seen actually some drones that testing drones to determine, they actually send them over top of fires and so on to determine where the hot spots are.
Right.
So I think that's a kind of an interesting take on it. And they can, using infrared cameras and so on, they can tell where hotspots are. Also, SWAT's starting to use them. In fact, I came from Fargo, North Dakota, and they're starting to actually use them in law enforcement. So there's so many different applications for drones.
Actually, that's interesting. I met a law enforcement officer from, I think he was Oklahoma. I think he was from Oklahoma, and he was there. The department had sent him because they bought a DJI Inspire. They were testing this program, and they wanted him specifically to talk to FLIR because they love this idea of, let's say you've got someone hiding someplace. You send, rather than risking the life of an officer, you send this thing up. It looks down with its infrared camera. It will tell you exactly where the suspect is. And they were saying, look, if we need to use a helicopter, we call one from our neighboring precinct, but that costs us money. I mean, it's basically $10,000 an hour when we call one of those things in, and they're not always available. For that same amount of money, we could equip all the patrol cars in our fleet with a drone that has an IR camera. It goes up and it comes back down, and they know exactly where the person is. So it's that kind of a utility that I'm looking forward to. Cheebert, I know that UH is also doing some research into swarming.
Yeah, in fact, the Hawaii Spaceflight Laboratory is working on using some software to design for microsats that we've been launching into orbit, because we're actually doing swarm microsats. Well, they're modifying that, and actually high school kids are working on building custom-made drones. We're actually 3D printing the frames so that we have room for all the computing. And they're going to be able to fly a collection of drones as a matrix. And the plan is to be able to go do some ultra-accurate mapping, which ought to be really, really, really cool.
Right. We've got Madison in the chat room who's making a very good point right now. He's saying, look, drones are non-subtle and they're very loud. And I understand that. He's saying, look, in order for them to be more useful, they have to be more invisible. Well, one of the interesting things, and Cheebert, we're going to get to this when we do one of your drone builds. The drones that we've been building have used between 6 and 10-inch props, and those can be kind of loud, but the larger you get, the more relatively quiet it is and the more efficient it is. The drones that we'll be building for your project, Cheebert, have 30-inch props, so they can get really, really high and they can be really, really quiet. So go figure. Now, I didn't want this to be a drone love-infest, so I did want to bring in something for the people who thought drones were being a little obtrusive and they wanted something to combat them. So let's take you back to Interdrone to show you something you could use if you don't want drones in your enterprise. Sometimes you need to keep drones off your property, which is why I'm at D-Drone looking at the drone tracker with Renee Sieber. Renee, this is an interesting looking device. It looks like a mine, but you tell me that this is the best way to find out if there are drones hovering over my property.
Yes, so the drone tracker is a security device that you install inside your property, and it will detect drones flying into your airspace using multiple sensors, using visual detection, using acoustical detection, combined in a single platform.
So I've got visual detection, I've got acoustic detection. I know I've got a wide-angle camera here in the middle that gives me about 100 degrees of viewage. I know you have an IR camera, but you said acoustic detection? How do you do that?
Acoustic detection means that we are using microphones. In this case, we're using 2 microphones for a stereo signal. And we're using acoustical up to the ultrasonic sound range, so up to 100 kilohertz, which also gives us signals that you, as a human, you're not able to hear. So acoustic means for us, it's a combination of visual and acoustical, because drones emit acoustical signals, or most of them do, and drones can be visible in the sky. That's why the camera is an important part of it too.
If I wanted to protect my property, how would I use this? How would I set it up? How many would I need to protect like a prison-sized piece of property from incursive drones?
Yes, so for prison-sized property, or for the typical ones, you would need like 5 to 10 drone trackers. You might not need to protect the entire space, so you might need to protect certain courts, certain places where people can go out. So those are the important and the critical parts of your infrastructure that you would like to protect.
And how do I connect and power these? I noticed that there's a single cable coming out of the back, so I'm assuming you're doing some sort of data/power connectivity. But then how am I alerted? How does it tell me that, oh, by the way, there's a drone hanging over the southmost fence?
Right. So you're absolutely correct. It's going to be powered through a PoE-based cable. So all you need is a PoE-capable switch that gives power, and it also gives network connectivity. And you typically mount it up on a wall, looking outside into the sky. And once the system's set up, you can configure it with a browser-based UI, and then for notifications, you can use an iPhone app, or you can connect it through SNMP, for instance, into your network or an existing security installation system.
If they want to keep drones from blowing up their property, how much are they going to be looking at per unit?
So per unit, we're actually looking at a sales price between $6,000 and $8,000 for a single unit, and of course, there's going to be rebates if you order more, right?
Renee Cheebert, thank you very much for talking to us. If they want to find out more about the drone tracker, if they want to find out more about D-Drone, where can they go online?
Yeah, go to ddrone.com.
Father Robert Ballecer, that's the drone tracker, and, well, if you hate drones, you're going to love D-Drone. I specifically asked about the prison because these have actually been deployed at prisons. So anytime you hear a story about a drone being intercepted at a prison, they're probably running drone trackers, D-Drone. It's an interesting battle because just as you have those who are rushing to find new ways to use drones and quadcopters, octocopters in the enterprise, you're also finding those who are going to be making money in ways to keep them away from enterprise facilities. In fact, Lou Maresca, in the chat, we have a private chat between the hosts, you were asking if there was an EM blast that could possibly knock a drone out of the sky. Not with this product, but you could tie this to Boeing's laser system, which will actually blast it out of the sky. So, you know, maybe you can get Microsoft to spring for that. What do you think?
Sounds good to me. Personal security.
Well, gentlemen, I want to move on because drones are fun. But the real reason why we're here for this episode is because we've invited a special guest. We have Tim Erlin from Tripwire. He is the Director of Product Management, and he wants to talk to us about something that's even more important than the coming of drones into enterprise networking, and that is what Microsoft thinks will be Armageddon should they be forced to release emails from a foreign server. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take a moment to thank the second sponsor of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and it's Igloo Software. Oh, remember when the corporate intranet was cutting edge? Right? It was that thing that we really liked. It looked like the internet, but it had all of our private information. It had all the scheduling that we needed for our company. Well, those days are gone. And now those corporate intranets look dated at best, and they are just horribly, horribly non-functional pieces of garbage at worst. Anyone that's worked in a corporate environment knows that those corporate internets can be absolutely painful. The content is stale, the interface is ugly, and you just can't access it on your mobile devices, which is why we're so happy to have Igloo Software as a supporter of the Twilight Riot. Now, Igloo is an intranet that you'll actually like. It's a cloud portal that enables you to share files, collaborate on documents, blog updates, coordinate calendars, and manage projects all from the same attractive and, importantly, intuitive interface. It leverages the best part of the internet, important enterprise-specific data at your fingertips and what people have come to expect from social. Now, Igloo gives you your users comments, like buttons, and the ability to add content based on permissions with drag-and-drop widgets and WYSIWYG editors. That means if they know how to use social, they're going to know how to use Igloo. Of course, a beautiful and intuitive interface isn't very useful if your users can't access it on the devices that they're using, which means mobile. That's why Igloo is built with responsive design that automatically reformats to your phone or your tablet. And it's also customizable. Whether you're a large enterprise using SharePoint or a fast-growing business with a hodgepodge of tools and platforms, you can now create an intranet that matches your brand's look and feel. It simplifies how you work, and it's accessible on any device. Most importantly, it just lets you feel and look professional. Now, how about security? Well, Igloo is based on SSL and 256-bit encryption. It's baked into a variety of access authentication and identity service modules. That means that only authorized users will have access to the data they're supposed to have access to. They offer plans starting as low as $3 per user per month, and unlike other solutions, you get full access to Igloo's entire suite of tools, all for one low price. None of this nickel and diming you for every new service that you want. Volume pricing is also available if it's going to be used by government agencies, and we see it being used right now by companies like Hulu, Inventive Health, American Family Insurance, and IP Switch. Now, here's what we want you to do. We want you to try Igloo software. You can sign up right now and try it for free at igloosoftware.com/twit. That's igloosoftware.com/twit. And when you sign up through our link, you can get your own Igloo for up to 10 people absolutely free for as long as you want it. That's right, free for as long as you want or need it. That's igloosoftware.com/twit. And we thank Igloo Software for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. We welcome to the show, this is always my favorite part when we bring in the guest, Mr. Tim Erlin, the Director of Product Management at Tripwire. Tim, thank you very much for coming on to speak with us.
Hey, I'm happy to be here.
Oh, but before we go any further, people have probably heard of Tripwire. You're pretty big. You're a very active company. Could you tell us, what is Tripwire? What do you do?
Sure, happy to. So Tripwire is a provider of advanced threat, security, and compliance solutions, primarily for the enterprise. So we help customers figure out what's in their environment, gain visibility into how they're vulnerable, how they might be misconfigured, and also manage compliance of their devices against a number of standards.
Compliance has been a big topic on TWIAT, everything from PCI compliance to HIPAA compliance. When you walk into a new installation, a new deploy, a new client, how do you typically handle that? I mean, you have to do a lot of research to make sure you know what compliances they're supposed to have, but then how do you bring them up to that compliance level?
Sure. So generally speaking, with our customers, they start with a problem that they're looking to have us help solve. So they're often in the process, with compliance specifically, if we're not talking about security, they're in the process of either building or updating a compliance program that they have in place. So they have a good sense of which standards or which regulations they need to be compliant with. And what we really do is provide tools that allow them to gain visibility in their organization across their assets on how they're not compliant, how they are compliant, and provide information about how they can make changes in the environment to improve their compliance. So achieve and maintain compliance is really the goal.
This is a topic that really interests me, because I've seen this trend over the last couple of decades. Hopefully you can give us your input on this. Compliance was never easy, but it seemed more simple in the past, because you had businesses that had their defined niche. You were a finance company, or you were a technology company, you were a healthcare company, and that defined what compliance standards you needed to have in your policies. But now the modern company is gonna bridge a lot of those different industries, and so you find companies that have multiple compliance standards that they have to include in their policies. And I'd even say that sometimes you're going to find compliance standards that will compete with one another. How do you deal with that when you approach a client and they say, look, we deal with healthcare records, but at the same time we do financial, and at the same time we do X, Y, and Z that requires access to this information, which could possibly violate these other compliance standards? Well, what advice do you give them?
Well, that's part of the challenge with visibility, or one of the objectives with visibility, I should say, is to help customers understand, what's in their environment and where those policies might apply, and give them the ability to do intelligent grouping of servers and other devices so that they can apply compliance policies appropriately. And also, you mentioned the relative simplicity of the past. It used to be that you could run some of these compliance programs in a fairly manual fashion, but that aggregation of standards and policies really drives the need for automation. So a fair amount of what we do is help customers take something they're doing manually now that takes a lot of time and automate that process.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty, because we've brought you on specifically to talk about Microsoft. Microsoft is going through a battle right now, and it's not getting nearly as much play in the press as I thought it deserves. Could you explain what's at issue here? Microsoft has been ordered by a U.S. court to release emails. Those emails exist on a server that's not in the United States. Microsoft is essentially saying, look, if you allow this to happen, this is Armageddon. This is Armageddon for security that we provide to the customers who trust our services and trust us to act according to the laws of any municipality in which we exist.
This case is actually started in 2013. So you're right that it's been going on for quite a while without a lot of press coverage. It's now on its second appeal. It's in the Second Circuit Court. And the most recent news item was the oral arguments that Microsoft made, which generated some headlines. And I think you described the issue fairly accurately. The U.S. government, as part of a narcotics investigation, demanded through a warrant that Microsoft turn over a set of emails for a user of the MSN email system. And Microsoft said, no, we can't do that. Those emails are stored in Ireland, and therefore the warrant doesn't apply because it's extraterritorial. They're outside the United States. And they've lost the case twice effectively, and they're on to that second appeal. So that's the general situation. At issue is really how the Electronic Communications Privacy Act applies, specifically the Stored Communications Act, which is a section of that. That's a law that was originally passed in 1986. It's been amended a few different times. But, in this case, the courts are doing what courts do and interpreting the law. And Microsoft is arguing that their interpretation is wrong, obviously.
One of the decisions, one of the reasons for decisions that the court gave during the first appeal was that we understand the extraterritorial argument. We understand that the server doesn't physically exist, but again, we are interpreting the law. And because it is so easy to move data between jurisdictions, you can no longer apply the physical server law to what is essentially data that can be shifted from one country to the next in a matter of seconds. Does that make sense to you? Because I want to be fair here. I understand what the Department of Justice is going after. I mean, obviously, they're going after a serious crime here. This is not a fishing expedition. This is not, we think there might be something wrong. This is, look, we can tell you exactly who we're looking for. We can tell you exactly when we need the emails from, and we can tell you what we're looking for inside those emails. But at the same time, doesn't it does that justify breaking down the whole idea of national sovereignty?
So it's interesting that nowhere in this case has someone said that the government shouldn't have access to these emails or shouldn't be able to get this information as part of a criminal investigation. So the arguments are really about how they obtain the emails in question, and the vehicle by which they do that is where you sort of bring up this question of national sovereignty and the ease with which data can be moved. The argument on Microsoft's side is that, the argument on the government side rather, is that because Microsoft is the entity that's receiving this warrant, and because Microsoft is headquartered in the U.S. and because they have control over this information, that the warrant should apply. It's actually, their argument is that it's not extraterritorial at all. It's a warrant applied to a U.S. company with data that they have control over. And in that sense, that's where the U.S. government stands on why the data should be accessible or provided by Microsoft.
But that's the slippery slope, right? Because, I mean, yes, Microsoft is a U.S. company it has a physical presence in the United States, but it also has physical locations in other countries, and it's registered in other countries. It's a company in other countries. It seems to be opening up this argument of, well, Microsoft exists in Russia, so if Russia starts demanding emails, don't they now use the same precedent that we set? They can ask for any email, and Microsoft now has to comply because they exist within the physical boundaries of Russia's governance.
And an interesting way to think about that is, what would happen if, a foreign government in a country where Microsoft happens to have an office were to, physically seize the servers on which those emails are stored. So instead of submitting a warrant and saying, you need to provide this information, that they just showed up, busted down the doors, and said we're taking it. And the U.S. in theory wouldn't be able to say that's that's not acceptable because they're doing the same thing to Ireland.
Well, also because we already did it. We did it to Kim.com. That's exactly what we did to Mega Upload. They went in, they physically took the servers, and then clients who had no illegal material whatsoever, it was an absolute jungle for them to try to get that data back because they had to prove that the data belonged to them, and it was a nightmare. But yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We're hitting on one of the key points here, which is that the law enforcement access to electronic communications and data is not the same thing as physical seizure of assets. And the law does provide some distinction between the two, but it's fairly obvious to all the parties involved that the current law doesn't really provide enough clarity on how these situations should be handled. So there is also a piece of legislation in process, the LEADS Act, which is the Law Enforcement Access to Stored Data Act. And it's a bicameral legislation, and it's in committee in both the House and the Senate. So who knows when that's going to come out of committee? But part of its goal, which Microsoft supports, is to provide some distinction and some clarity around just these issues.
All right.
But in the meantime, it's up to the courts.
Let's land it a little bit from the 10,000-foot level here. I'm a IT administrator at a 10,000-seat enterprise here in the United States, and I've got locations out of the country, and I've got information on my physical locations in various countries. What does this mean to me? Should Microsoft lose this appeal yet again? What is the takeaway for the way I need to secure my data?
Yeah, what's the impact? That's a good question. So it'll depend a little bit on where and exactly how Microsoft, in this hypothetical situation, were to lose the case. That'll bear out in very specific details of how what the precedent is. But in essence, what it means for you as a U.S.-based company with data stored in multiple places, multiple countries, is that given a warrant or a subpoena, that you would have to provide that data regardless of where it's stored, legally speaking.
I want to go ahead and bring in my co-hosts here and get their views on this. Cheebert, I want to start with you. We have been following this story since 2013, since it first happened, and we've been hearing little bits and pieces since then. And since then, you could also tuck in things like the right to be forgotten, because that touches on a lot of the same basic principles of, well, what happens to data on the internet? Can you control it? Should one country be able to dictate what it can and cannot be found? But what is your take as a scientist, as an educator, as someone who works IT at a university in the United States? What do you consider to be the property rights of digital information that can freely flow between servers?
Actually, I'm going to sidestep that only because it's one of those things that has come up at the university many, many times. And apparently by storing your data outside the United States, it isn't quite publishing, but it's close. So it actually doesn't apply to the science hat that I have to wear because we're not supposed to store our data outside the US. Now, for the IT administrator, I'm actually leaning towards the Microsoft point of view. I don't think, in my opinion, that the US government should be able to go and reach across borders. I think it's a slippery slope that I personally don't think we should go down. I want to be able to help law enforcement. I really do, especially since I used to be law enforcement. But I also think there's a line in the sand that we shouldn't be crossing, and I think extraterritorialism is that line.
So let me pose a question, if I may, along those lines, because I find it really interesting to consider the impact of whatever the decision is. Ask yourself, if you have data stored in a foreign country, which country's protections for how that data is accessed do you want to apply as a standard? It may be that the U.S. has the Fourth Amendment and the protections that have been put in place through law are better than the country in which the data is stored.
Right.
And that's a consideration on the other side, is that you might find your data is better protected or your privacy is better protected by that scenario than the other.
Yeah, I was just thinking, if you happened, and remember, a lot of times you can't control which data center your data is living in. It's all part of the organic software-defined network that is the cloud. But should your data happen to land in a country where there is no constitutional protection of privacy, could the United States government just say, okay, well, since it's not in a server on U.S. soil, we're just going to walk in and make a copy? There's nothing illegal with that because it's not. We don't have to adhere to U.S. law. I'd like that.
Or strike a deal with that country that says, why don't you just hand things over to us and we'll skip all of this legislative, this due process that's needed.
Actually, Specs in the chat room hit it right on the head. He said data extradition agreements. And yeah, that could be it. It could be saying, hey, look, we'll give you access to any data that you want from any of your citizens. You give us access to any data we want from any of our citizens. I don't know. I want to bring Lou in here because he has absolutely nothing to lose by bashing Microsoft whatsoever. Lou, senior developer at Microsoft, would you like to give any words here, or would you just like to smile at the camera and nod your head?
You know, I think I definitely, like what Cheebert said, I definitely do agree with the approach that Microsoft is taking, and that, trying to protect the data. One thing that I work on the CRM group at Microsoft, one thing that we do is when a user or a organization comes in and sets up where their data is, they actually can specify. So they can say, hey, I'm in EMEA, or I'm in Asia Pac, or I'm in Australia or Japan, or or Latin America. They can specify where their data goes, and again, that can determine whether there's specific rules applied or compliancy rules applied to that data. So I think that I think it's very important that the companies offer that type of thing, because then it again can be controlled by specific rules by those countries, and the company can specify where the data goes and when it's there. So I think Microsoft's definitely taking the correct approach. Hopefully it'll follow through.
Tim, let me push over to you. I'm thinking there might be something more core that we can get at that we addressed a long time ago. And actually one of our shows here on the Twit TV network, This Week in Law, they cover it quite a bit. And that is, how are we actually defining this property? Because digital property is not very well defined at all. It's incredibly nebulous. You can copy it, so it's not as if something has been stolen. Is that really what's at issue? Because I mean, if this was monetary assets that I had in another country, there is absolutely no question what rights I have to keep that from the United States government. But because it's digital and it's a bit ephemeral, is that the issue that we're running into?
Well, it's interesting that you ask it that way. One of the reasons that we're in this situation is because we, in the United States, created a law to address, the need to protect electronic communications, and we tried to make it forward-looking, but it doesn't account for all of the technological change that's occurred. So think about how data storage may change in the future, and try and apply whatever the conclusion of this case is to that situation. So today we say these emails are stored in Ireland, but there's no reason they couldn't be stored in pieces in multiple countries. And what do you do then? How would you apply the principle either way if bits and pieces, literally bits of the email content, were stored in multiple jurisdictions, multiple countries around the world? The second thought experiment that's really interesting to do, and it's maybe a bit harder, I think, is applying some of the encryption discussions that have been going on. The U.S. government can ask for these emails because the content is accessible, but if the emails were encrypted in a way that Microsoft actually couldn't supply them, that presents a different challenge and a different thought experiment for how this case turns out.
Cheebert, this strikes me because it's not just where the data is stored. It's also where the data goes through transit, because we both worked on interop, and we know that for many years there, every single bit and byte of traffic that transited through that network was captured. We captured every last piece of data. And so it wasn't a place where that data was intended to be stored. We just happened to have a copy. And if you're going to come down on the rights of the data owner, that it be actual property that they can protect according to the Constitution of the United States, we were huge violators of that right to privacy because we kept a copy that they didn't even know about.
Oh yeah, yeah. And, it happens over and over and over again, and especially the equivalent of the Internal Revenue Service in Canada. That's how they found. That's how they caught the kid that broke into their system. So it's happening everywhere. Network General and various other corporations make a big business out of this, and it works. It helps. There's a lot of diagnostics. Everybody kind of tends to turn a blind eye, saying, "Well, nobody really looks at it except when you got to do some diagnostics." But it doesn't change the fact that you've made a copy. You've made a copy more than likely without the people knowing that you made a copy. And it is a really interesting question, and I'm really, really happy I'm not a lawyer, because this argument on both sides have great merit, and it makes my head really hurt.
Well, Tim, let me throw that over to you, because you must deal with that. That's definitely a compliance issue about how long you keep data, how long you keep logs, how long you keep metadata. What's your take on that? Because, I mean, every time I hear a judge talk about, well, if you make any kind of copy, that means it's illegal, I'm always thinking, well, electronics always makes copies of data. That's how it works. When I'm moving from one buffer to the next, I am actually making a copy. And if you're going to hold me to that level of detail, it means networking in general would be illegal according to your schema. Where do you draw the line? How do you come into this debate?
Well, in essence, in a lot of ways, we don't, because what we try to do for customers is help them, identify and validate whatever configuration they're required to put in place. And it's usually around, data retention requirements that are specified in some regulation or standard, whether they have to, keep logs for 90 days or maintain records for 6 months or whatever it is. We want to help them validate that they're actually doing that. That in terms of, copies of network communications that are going over the internet, I'm not sure what the legality of that situation is specifically. It probably depends a little bit on the contents, and in some sense, when you're sending things that way, you're doing so voluntarily. So it's not being, it's your choice to provide that. There's a legal theory called the third party doctrine that talks about how if you voluntarily provide information and you were previously told at some point that that information could be supplied to law enforcement, it lowers the legal requirements for law enforcement obtaining that information. I'm not sure it applies in this case, but or in the case of the network traffic, but it's potentially relevant in the Microsoft case at some point down the road.
Huh. A prior disclaimer that says that data may be shared with law enforcement upon its requirement. Lou Maresca, didn't Microsoft just release a product that seems to include that language?
There's a screenshot. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
I remember being called Windows 10, but again, I'm going to let that one go. That was a cheap shot. That was way below the belt. Gentlemen, unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I want to have one last go around. Cheebert, I want to start with you. Looking at this debate, this is not over. We're going to have to bring this back again and again and again, because this is important for people who work in the enterprise. What can you do with your data? What can't you do with your data? As an administrator who is actually responsible for where data is stored and how it is secured, if Microsoft loses this case, would it change the way that you administer your network?
Yeah, well, like I said, academics, we're not supposed to be storing our data across national borders anyway, but I'm sure that there's a lot of people that do. And if Microsoft loses this case, yeah, I think there's going to have to be a lot more thought. It's right now, it's to the point where my dean actually does not like using our current email system because it is a cloud app, and there's no guarantee that his correspondence isn't going to leave the country. So as a result, we maintain an email server specifically so that he can make sure that his email correspondence never leaves the campus. I don't blame him. The whole legal question is very muddy. There's a lot of validity to both sides of the argument. It makes my head hurt every time I think about it. But yeah, I think what I'll do is I will say yes. I will definitely have to change the way I handle cloud, the way I handle backup, and even the way I handle offsite storage, because I'm going to have to start thinking about this if Microsoft loses.
Lou Maresca, let me give you your last words. What's your take on this brouhaha? What's your take on what Microsoft's next steps would be? Honestly, I thought Microsoft would get more support than what they're getting right now. It seems like they're lone gunmanning this fight. Although I'm seeing a shaking head from Tim, so we'll get back to him later on. But what's your take?
I'm hoping that they don't lose this, but in the same sense, like Cheebert said, the companies and corporations, even users, are going to have to think more about where things are getting stored and whether companies are specifying it, how they're specifying it, and and in how their privacy and what type of data that you're storing there. So I think again, people are going to have to do a double take when it comes to doing those services, whether online backup or it's online storage, syncing data, storing data, customer business data, that kind of thing. So it all depends, and hopefully if they don't, hopefully they don't lose. So they don't have to think about that stuff. But in the same sense, companies should still be thinking about it.
Tim, you were shaking your head, voicing opposition to this idea that Microsoft was going it alone. Are they getting support from the industry at large?
Yeah, so I was reading a list of the organizations that have filed briefs in support of Microsoft's position. It includes the EFF, Verizon, Apple and Cisco, AT&T. So there's certainly support for the Microsoft position in the industry by others who might be affected by it.
Okay, so they're not going it alone, but what would be your last bit of takeaway? So if you have a worried IT administrator who is thinking that this is going to have to really change the way that he or she stores data for the enterprise, what bits of advice, what bits of wisdom could you offer?
Talk to your legal counsel before you make changes. Honestly, I don't think that the outcome of this case is going to have far-reaching substantial impact, primarily because I think that there are enough lawyers involved that whatever the outcome, the large enterprises at least will organize themselves around it. So this wouldn't be a conversation if Microsoft were in a position to argue that the entity in Ireland were effectively a separate legal entity and that you'd have to go through the existing treaties to get that data. And given that the situation changing, Microsoft might choose to organize itself that way, as might other companies. So I suspect that while there's a lot of interesting topics to discuss, I don't know that much is going to change unless this pushes further up Supreme Court. That might make a really significant precedent.
Fantastic. Tim Erlin, the Director of Product Management over at Tripwire, we want to thank you for joining us for this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Could you please tell the folks listening and watching us at home where they can find you, where they can find Tripwire, and where they can go if they want to find out more information about what it is that you do?
Sure. Well, tripwire.com is a great place to find out more about Tripwire. You can find out more about me on Twitter, at Turlin, so first initial, last name, easy to find. And I spend a fair amount of time there. So
we thank you for being part of the episode and for sharing your knowledge with us. We also want to thank our panelists, starting with Lou Maresca. Lou, it's always a pleasure to see you. Of course, you are my co-host on Coding 101. You are the brains behind that operation. I'm just the eye candy. I understand that. I know. But could you please tell the folks where they could find you at Microsoft and find your work?
Absolutely. Like you said, we could always find us on Coding 101 on Mondays at 2:30 live here on Twit. And you can find all my work I do at Microsoft at crm.dynamics.com.
It's always a pleasure to have you on. We're going to have you in the Bay Area at the same time that Cheebert's here, maybe for DEF CON. I think we should have a big DEF CON party next year.
That would be great.
That might be kind of fun. And of course, my good friend, Brian Chee, Cheebert, I will see you in a few weeks. I think you're going to be in town in December, so I can't wait for that. But could you let the audience know what you've been working on? I know you've got a couple of projects. I don't know how many of them you can talk about, but give them a nice little taste of what's coming in Cheebert land.
Well, obviously drones and things like that. A lot of smart grid work. We're actually going to be putting out some stuff on Molokai. We're actually in the process of deploying a drafts system, shall we say, We're using off-the-shelf Kodak SP360s to look up at the sky and track clouds. Because if we can get a 3D model of the clouds as they go over the islands, we can also use standard trigonometry and figure out when the shadows of the clouds are going to occlude photovoltaic arrays, which means maybe, just maybe, we can tell the power companies when there's going to be a drop or when there's going to be a spike so that they can avoid having to start up another generator. That'd be interesting.
Indeed. You get all the fun projects. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being part of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Again, it's always a pleasure. Of course, I also want to thank you. That's right, the person who just spent the last hour listening to the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe. That's according to 9 out of 10 Irish servers. We want to do something for you. We want to make it easier for you to get your fix of Twiet. Just go to our show page at twit.tv/Twiet. There you'll find all of our episodes. If you want to download them in whatever format you need them, you can find them, and you can collect them so that you could get more and more and more. That's right. We've got, what, 158 episodes now of This Week in Enterprise Tech for your enjoyment. You'll also find a little drop-down menu so you can subscribe to the feed, which means you'll automatically get the format of your choice, audio, video, high-definition video, into the device of your choice. Your iPhone, your iPad, your Android device, your Mac, your PC, your laptop, your desktop. It doesn't matter. We've got a format for you. Also, don't forget that you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/PadreSJ. It's a great place to go if you want to find out what we're going to be talking about each week and to suggest guests for future episodes. In fact, we have had a few listeners suggest guests who we have now booked for the show. So if you want to see it on Twiet, that's probably the place to go. Finally, I want to thank everyone here at the Brick House who makes this show possible, to Lisa, to Leo, to Karsten, my super producer, and of course to my TD, who today is Mr. Alex Gumpel. Alex, you are absolutely engrossed. I want to thank you. On your Windows phone, by the way, which is quite nice.
Don't make fun of me, Padre.
I won't make fun of you. I will say that you are the flow master. Could you tell the people what it is that you do here?
You can find me sitting behind here directing fabulous episodes of Know How every week on Thursdays.
That's right. And he is the director. We also called him Hal Grumpel or Al. I can't remember all the names that we have for him. Anyways, I'm Father Robert Ballecer, and until next time, just remember, if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep quiet.